Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Okay, hello there. Welcome to a new training session for today's class. Okay, we're gonna start in a minute. Okay, who is Honor BRP and X3? Can you please type your name on the chat box, please? All right. In order to identify you in the participations on the chat box, etc. All right. Yes. Okay. Well, as you know, we are now reviewing some important concepts, theories, approaches, right? Content in a specific for the next exam, right? The next exam for the process called the Ascenso de Escala Docente this year, right? Okay, the exam is going to be in September. So we are developing the syllabus or the list of contents that are official. And today we have some important points or aspects to check. Okay, so let's start. Okay, you know that these are some recommendations. And here we have. Okay, welcome to session 4, right? Session 4 is going to be developed today and tomorrow, right? Today we're going to cover some contents on the list, and tomorrow we will continue, all right, and finish all the topics, right? In today's session, what we have is the active methodologies, right? The current methodologies English teachers are applying for their sessions, right? The active and communicative methodologies, right? That CENEV promotes, right? That Minedu encourages to adapt and to use in our sessions. Okay, so today we are going to check these methodologies. Okay, my dear teachers, I will present the list of contents, all right, for today's session. Here we have. Fine. Okay. In today's session about this active and communicative methodologies, we are going to revise, first of all, our CLT. Remember that in session 1, when we talk about the approaches in CENEP, we talk about it, right? The communicative language teaching, CLT, right? That stands for the communicative approach. We are going to review this. We're going to start with this, okay, today. And then we're going to continue with the next one. That is the task-based language teaching, right? In other words, TBLT, right? The task-based language teaching. All right, this is another methodology that we are using in our classrooms, right? Then we are going to continue with the project-based learning, or PBL, right? Yes, this is another methodology that we actively, right, that we active using in our sessions. Okay, then we're gonna continue with the content-based learning, right? CBL. Then we'll move on This is actually a model that is called PPP, that stands for presentation, practice, and production. Okay, and finally, we're going to revise this, that is that inquiry-based learning. Okay, we're going to cover today, I hope, most of them, and tomorrow we are going to continue and finish. Okay, what is our learning outcome? What do we need to develop at the end of this session? Well, at the end of this session, you, my dear teachers, will strengthen your pedagogical understanding, right? Your pedagogical understanding of these methodologies, these active and communicative methodologies, right? Within the competency-based approach of the CENET, because remember, everything is connected, and we must encourage our teaching practice based on these approaches and now these methodologies. All right, so let's get started. Let's get started with a short review of CLT, the communicative language teaching. All right, good. As I mentioned, we covered this in session 1. Okay, we covered this in session 1. So this is like a reminder about the CLT. All right, my dear teacher, so let's start. Good. Okay, you know that the CLT is an approach, right? It is an approach, all right? Actually, it is also called the communicative approach in short, right? When we shorten the name. So it is an approach where language is learned through meaningful communication. That is very important to highlight, okay? Students learned language, students learn English, right? Through communicative situations that are meaningful, that are contextualized, and they are also authentic, right? There's authentic interaction, all right, among our students, all right? These are very important ideas. These are key concepts, right? When they say that it's meaningful, when they say that it's communicative, when they say that it's authentic, when they say that there's real interaction, right? We're talking about the communicative language teaching, or CLT. All right, so these are the elements that we need, right? That we need to gather when we develop our sessions and we use this approach in our learning processes, right? Good. We also covered this in session 1, but let's going to review this very quickly. What are the principles of CLT? Well, remember that meaning is very important, right? A student should understand the importance, the use of language, right? In a practical and real life scenario, right? They should focus in the expressions they're gonna use. They should focus, for example, in collocations they're gonna use. All right, some prompts that we can provide our students in order to express their ideas and use the language in meaningful communication, right? Over than the form, right? Here it's not important. We don't pay attention on accuracy, because the important thing is that they can communicate ideas effectively. This can be improved by practice, but at the first moment we should prioritize meaning over form, right? Interaction is another important principle in our communicative language teaching, right? Yes, they should interact each other. Students should use language when they interact each other, right? Not isolated activities where they don't have the opportunity to communicate, express opinions, share ideas, etc. Right? But communication is a social process, so they should communicate with their peers, with their classmates, right? Well, interaction is key. Yes, authentic use of language. We should give our students the opportunity to practice their English in authentic activities. Authentic activities uh, in which they reflect real life situations, right? Because our students might face, right? Might face this kind of situations. We should provide these scenarios, this context, right, to our students in the classroom, right? Because in the real life, they should probably face the situations, right? Okay, and also authentic because students should generate their own language, not to repeat, not to memorize, um, not to memorize a dialogue, from example, from a book, right? They should formulate questions by themselves. They should answer questions by themselves, right? They should generate the language also, right? And of course, the student is the center of everything, right? They are the most important element in our classrooms, right? The students should participate in learning process in a very active way, right? Remember, students should talk in our sessions more than us, right? Remember the STT, the student talking time, right? Okay, this was a short review. Then we'll continue with the types of CLT activities, right? So if this approach stands for active communication, meaningful context, authentic activities, interaction between students, so the types of activities we should promote in our sessions are role plays, for example, discussions, right? Debates, the information gap activities that I also explained the first session, right? Interviews and problem solving tasks. So the activities that are not, right, that are not about this approach, CLT, the communicative language teaching, are, for example, when students are asked, right, to read the dialogues aloud, right, in which they don't generate the language, they memorize something, right? They are not using language in a practical way, right? Here, they are just reproducing something, right? When students read dialogues aloud, this is not CLT, right? When students memorize script, when students repeat, right, drills, these are not CLT activities. So, in order to continue with this, here we have the common hand structures, right? For example, you should be alert, right? When the activity includes long grammar explanation, that teacher is the center of the session, that TTT, right? Remember that teacher talking time, right? When there are grammar explanations for long periods, right? This is definitely not a CLT activity, right? Okay. For example, mechanical drills or repetition without communicative purpose, right? This is another distractor. You should identify quickly that these are not about this approach, right? Then when, yes, the teacher is the center, right? When the activities don't reflect, right, real communicative purpose, right? The activities, sometimes the distractors are very nice. They are written in a very nice way, right? The activities look oral, right? Look fun, entertaining, dynamic, right? But if you analyze in a deeper way, they are actually mechanical. Students are not really using language in a practical way. They are not um, students are not generating messages by themselves, right? Even the activity looks fun, entertaining, dynamic, maybe oral. You should pay attention to the other elements, right? These these ones, all right? Well, we have here a real fun item, a real question in one exam in 2023. All right? So, one more time, please, my dear teachers, read the context, analyze the distractors, what the distractors are, and finally, choose the best one, the question, and pay attention to the question. Read the question carefully. Okay, my dear students, my dear teachers, let's start. Welcome to the class, everyone. Here we have Elber, Lucia, Benavides, Luis, right, Mercedes. Yes. Okay, my dear teachers, let me know your answer on the chat box, please. Okay, we have one more. Paola is also here. Okay, come on, my dear teachers. Let me know your answers. All right. Mhm. Okay. All right. We have one answer in the chat box. Benavides, Luis. Luis says that is the second option. Mhm. Okay. All right. Well, let's start. Let's start. Remember that we are using the following strategy, right? To answer items in the PUN, right? The PUN exams. First of all, we read the context very carefully. We should understand, right? Everything about it, right? The scenario it is taken, the teacher's purpose. We should read carefully. And then we should read the question carefully too, right? Because there are some situations in which Minedu test, right? As teachers maybe focus, right? Some questions are in the negative form, so we should pay attention to this, and then we should analyze which the structures are, and finally identify the best option, right? So here it says, okay, the rest of the teachers, please, if you know the answer, please let me know on the chat box, okay? You should continue participating on the chat box. So it says here, Cesar's third grade students, okay? We know the teacher's name, right? You know the grade. Cesar is teaching, it's a third grade class, okay? So his students, right, have been talking about the best travel destinations, okay? Now he wants them, Cesar wants his students, right? He wants them to use language, communicative approach. All right, here we have also the teacher's purpose, right? He wants them to use language, all right? Language related to that topic, right? The topic of travel destinations, right? Okay, good. So Cesar wants his students to use language, right? In an oral, remember to identify the type of task, the type of activity, the type of evidence too, right? In an oral communicative activity. Okay, so here we have definitely the communicative approach, right? Here in this item. All right. He has thought of the three following strategies. We have three different strategies. Okay. Let's read the strategies carefully, my dear teachers. First one. Okay. Remember Cesar's purpose. Okay. He wants his students to use language, right? Real English. Okay. Related to this topic, the context is travel destinations, okay? Remember that. He wants his students to use this in an oral communicative activity, not a written task, no, a speaking task, right? Oral communicative activity. What type of task is it? It is a speaking, right? Speaking task or an oral production task, right? Okay, this is very important. Well, first strategy, okay? Ask the students to get in pairs, okay? To get in pairs, pair work, and talk about a place, okay? We ask, well, Cesar asked his students to get in pairs, right? Talk about a place, okay? A place they had visited, a place that means a travel destination, right? Okay, it is connected with the topic, okay? Travel destination, okay? They had visited, the students have visited. All right. So it is related to his students' experiences, right? Life students have visited and that they have enjoyed. Okay. After that, after the pair work, right? Invite some students to share their classmates' answers, to report their classmates' answers, right? With the rest of the class. Okay. First, student talk in pairs, right? The activity is contextualized, right? They should talk about a place, a travel destination they had visited and enjoyed. And they also using language because they will report in the front, right? The classmates' answers, right? Of course, with some help, right? Giving first some prompts in order to guide our students, right? Yes. The second strategy says, ask the students to give an oral presentation, right? Oral presentation, okay? Yes. The activity is individual, right? Here, students don't talk to other peer as in the first strategy, right? They give an oral presentation by themselves regarding what? On the best, right? It says here, on the best places to go on vacation. Okay. Maybe here that the context, right? This task is based on, maybe it's not meaningful at all because it's very general. Best places to go on vacation, right? Not like in the first strategy in which students talk about places they have visited and enjoyed. This is more meaningful, right? Well, so pay attention to these differences too, right? Should analyze every piece of information, my dear teachers. Okay, so the strategy says, okay, ask the students to give an oral presentation, and after that, after the students finish their presentation, right, the audience asked a couple of questions, right? Okay, so the other students that are part of the audience formulate two questions for each presenter, right? Yes, and the presenter, of course, replies, right? Maybe here, this is more interactive because here the students interact each other when the audience asks some questions, formulates some questions, and the student in the front answers this question, right? Here we have some interaction. Okay, well, the third strategy. In the third strategy, we have, all right, it says here, ask the students to play the roles. Okay, it's a role play. You should identify also the type of activities, right? For example, here we have a paid work. All right. The students talk about a place they have visited, right? It's a conversation in pairs, right? Then the students report the classmates' answers, right? Here we have a presentation, and then here we have some questionnaire after, right? Okay. In strategy 3, students participate in a role play, right? Ask the students to role play, to play the roles of a tourist, right? And a school newspaper journalist. These are the two roles. This is a role play, right? Okay. A tourist, right, that has just visited Peru, right? Okay. The journalist asked the tourist, right? The journalist asked the tourist what the best places, right, in Peru are, okay? And the tourist replies and gives reasons. We have interaction here, right? In a role play, there's always interaction between students, right? Students generate questions, formulate questions, all right? Students also think about the language and use the language to give the answers, right? Now, the question here is, which of the strategies, right, Cesar has thought of is least communicative, right? The least communicative. Not the most, the opposite, the least communicative, all right? Okay, my dear teachers, according to the analysis, what is the answer? If you compare the three strategies, if you compare the level of interaction, the level, right? The level of interaction, definitely we have something important here, right? What's the most communicative, for example, right? Or what are the two strategies that are the most communicative? I know that you identify these two strategies that are the most communicative in the three strategies on the list, right? You should pay attention to the level of interaction. You also should pay attention to what is real communication, authentic activity, right? What's real communication versus a controlled practice, right? In which students are not autonomous. You give some guidance, right? But students are not producing freely the language. It's okay to have controlled practice, but remember Cesar's purpose. He wants his students to use language in an oral communicative activity, right? According to these aspects, we should analyze, right? The question says, which of the strategies is least communicative? The level of interaction in strategy 1, right, is fine, is good. Students first talk to each other in a conversation, and then they don't interact anymore, but they share their findings in the front, and they report their classmates' answers, right? The level of interaction in the second strategy, right, here is very limited, right? First, a student give an oral presentation in the front, right? And yeah, at the end, we have some interaction, but it is not real communication because this is just like a simple questionnaire in which students answer a couple of questions. This is very limited, right? This is also controlled, right? Which is not bad to have controlled practice, but the teacher's purpose is this, okay? So in the third strategy, the level of interaction is also fine because students role play a situation between a tourist and a newspaper journalist at a school, right? Students generate their own questions, students answer these questions. It is a good communicative activity. Also, role plays are examples of communicative activities too, right? Role play, debates, discussions, all right? So, my dear teachers, the least communicative, of course, is the second one, right? Here we don't have real communication. What is the communicative purpose of a strategy 2? What is the communicative purpose? There's no clear communicative purpose, right? On the opposite, in the other two strategies, 1 and 3, yes, the communicative purpose is very clear, right? There's good interaction between peers, yes, and they also are activities in which we generate scenarios to practice real life situations. In real life situations, right? You talk about the place you have visited and enjoyed. In a real life situation, you can talk to a tourist and ask some questions about the tourist experience here in Peru. These are real life activities, right? Okay, my dear teachers, you did it well. We continue with the next. Okay, here we have some, okay, let me erase the drawings. All right, here we have a one slide about information gap, because information gap activities are also examples of these CLT activities, these communicative language teaching activities, right? I also mentioned this type of activities in the first session, right? If you remember. Okay, so information gap activities occur when the students, right? When students have different information, right? There are some blanks, right? They should complete, right? Both students, student A, student B, this is the timetable for student B, for example, all right? Both students have different information, manage different information. What they should do, right, is to communicate each other in order to complete the blanks, right? In order to complete, right? Why is this type of activities so important in the communicative language teaching? They are very important because they promote communication between students, right? It creates authentic communication, right? It creates negotiation, right, of meaning, because the students should ask and answer some questions in order to get some information, right? It creates communicative necessity. Definitely they should communicate each other to complete the task. They should communicate. There's no other way, right? There's no other way to complete the blanks, right? If they don't ask some questions, right? Answer the questions, all right? So it is a good activity, all right? Now, some examples. When they complete the schedules, for example, schedule timetables as the example here, right? We have a timetable, right? We have two different moments in the morning, in the afternoon, right? So student B should complete, right? The student B should complete the blanks here about student A. So student B probably will ask some questions about the subject, right? The subject the student A has on the following days, right? So student B should generate some question. For example, right, Pepito, what do you have? What do you have on Mondays, right? What do you do on Mondays in the afternoon? What do you study, right, on Mondays in the afternoon? So student A will answer this question, right, using the language, right, and student B will complete, right, complete the task, all right? When we solve also mysteries, right, when we find differences The typical question or the typical activity, find someone who, right? Map direction activities, right? Okay. Remember, my dear teachers, this is very important. It is not information gap when both students already know all the answers. No, right? Because in here we don't have a real exchange, a real information exchange. If both students know the answers, what is the purpose then, right? What's the purpose? The purpose is to generate this interest and formulate some questions and find the answers and complete the task using the language, right? Okay, my dear teachers, we continue. This was one slide about this type of activity, and then we have a question here. One more time, my dear teachers, please read the question. The item is item 20, taken from the exam, the last exam, right? In 2025, right? And let me know your answer on the chat box, please. Elizabeth said regarding the last exercise, no? Option B, definitely option B. Good. All right, come on, let's get started. Hey guys, let me know when you're ready, okay? And type your answer on the chat box, please. Come on, guys. All right, let's start. Come on, my dear teachers. All right, let's get started, okay? You know that everything is based on the communicative approach in the CNEP, the CLT approach, right? Everything's connected, right? Luis says that is C, letter C. Okay, what about the rest of you, my dear teachers? So I encourage you to share your answer. Yes. All right, let's get started. Let's read the context of this question. All right, let's start. It says, Tina's students have been talking about their favorite dish. Okay, good. So we have here the context, right? These teachers' students have been talking about their favorite dish. Okay, good. All right. It says now the Tina, right? The teachers. She wants her students to participate in a communicative oral activity. One more time, we have a speaking task, right? Okay, so this is the teacher's purpose, right? When it says she wants them to participate in a communicative oral activity using the topic, right? The topic of the student's favorite dish. Okay, the question here is, which of the following strategies, okay, one more time, we have strategies, all right, which of the following strategies is it more appropriate, right, to carry out? More appropriate to carry out. Okay, more appropriate among the other strategies to carry out to develop in the session in the classroom. Okay, so let's start reading. Let's start reading this. Option A, the students write the recipe of their favorite dish. Okay, attention to the activities or the students' actions in this, right? In strategy one, for example, students write the recipe of their favorite dish in their notebooks. You should pay attention if this strategy is aligned. Remember the pedagogical alignment, okay? You should pay attention, you should focus, all right? You should pay attention if this activities, the students' actions, right, in the strategy, the actions are aligned to the type of task, all right, to the purpose, all right, to the evidence students will present. You should pay attention to this, okay? It says here, students write the recipe of their favorite dish. Next, they read it aloud, okay? They read it aloud, okay? They share the receipt they wrote first. They read it aloud to the whole class. Okay, finally, the teacher invites some volunteers to recall. The teacher invites some volunteers, some other students to recall, to remember, right, the ingredients mentioned, right, in the receipt, right? In the students receive, the students that presented in the front, all right? You should pay attention. Is this real communication, right? Is this the activity that is the more appropriate to carry out in the classroom? If Tina wants her students to talk about the topic of their favorite dish, first to write a receipt and then one student presents the receipt in the front and the other students uh, memorize, because they should memorize the ingredients and they should mention them, right? The ingredient. Is this appropriate for the teacher's purpose? Should pay attention to that. Okay, we have more options here. Elizabeth says that is C. Okay, the second strategy here is the students record, right? Record a video. The students record a video, okay, in which they give instructions to prepare their favorite dish. Okay, here we have something different, probably something more meaningful, right? Because they should give the instructions to prepare their favorite dish, right? Okay, but they record a video, okay? Remember that. Do we have here real interaction? Because to be communicative, interaction should exist, right? So attention to that. They record a video and then the teacher asks the students to use simple language for their classmates to understand the instructions given. Okay. Well, valid. It's completely valid, right? Okay, and finally, the teacher plays some of the videos. Okay, do we have real interaction here, right? Is it communicative? Think about it, all right? Think about it. Well, then we have option C, the third strategy. It says here, the students ask 5 peers, okay? The students ask okay, about what their favorite dish is. Okay, good. This is meaningful too because students have the opportunity to talk about their own preferences, their own experiences regarding food, right? As well as here and as well as here, right? But you should pay attention, remember, to the level of interaction, right? there's real communication or not. So they ask 5 peers, right? Not only that, they go deeper, right? They also ask why they like it, why, right? And what ingredients it is made of, right? Okay. Then they compare. They compare and analyze the answers, right? They compare, they analyze, all right, in order to find out similarities and differences, okay? This is very high cognitive demand, right? Remember the concepts, right? The teacher asks students to use simple language. Maybe this is something that is not high cognitive demand, right, for the students because the teacher thinks the students will not understand, so the teacher tries to simplify the activities, right? But this is when students compare, analyze, contrast information. This is very high cognitive demand, right? These are high mental processes, right? When they compare, etc. Finally, the students share their findings with the class and they continue using the language, right? When they share the findings in the front, they use the language, of course, with the teacher's guide. Maybe probably here the teacher gives students some prompts, right? In order to share these findings, right? Okay, so one more time, the question is, which of the following strategies is it more appropriate? More appropriate, okay? Well, one more time, you should pay attention to the level because the CLT, the communicative language teaching, promotes students' interaction, right? The level of interaction, all right? Attention to the level of interaction. Attention if this is real communication, all right, or this is a control practice in which students probably not use language freely, right? Okay, so in which of the option, right, in which of the options students are required to interact each other, right? For example, here, right? They don't interact each other, right? Because first they write the receipt and then students individually tell the class the ingredients they remember. Here, the students don't interact each other. This is not, definitely, this is not aligned to the communicative approach, right? What about here? Do they interact each other? When they present, when they record a video and when then the teacher plays the video in class, do students interact each other? No, right? They don't interact. The video part is very interesting because the students use the language, right? They use the language in a meaningful way because they talk about their favorite dish, right? But there's no interaction here, right? There's no interaction here. When the teacher plays the video, okay, the classmates have the opportunity to look at other products, other evidences, but they don't interact with their peers, right? What about this one here? When it says ask 5 peers, right? This is like a discussion, right? Okay, a pair activity, right? Well, actually with different partners, right? 5 different partners, right? And students interact with different partners here. Here, of course, they interact each other when they also analyze or compare and they find out the similarities and differences. They are using the language in a very meaningful way. They finally share this. Here we have real interaction, right? And this is what real communication is when they interact and they use the language in a practical way. In which of the options the students exchange information instead of just presenting the information or memorizing content? Here they memorize, here they present, but they don't exchange information. Here we have this exchange when they ask these questions, right? Remember that. Okay, so definitely the answer for this question, which of the strategies is it more appropriate, is letter C, definitely, right? This is the worst structure. This structure is, it's okay, but if you really analyze this, right, and connect everything, you might know that definitely this is the answer, right? Okay, this question was taken very recent last year, right? Okay, about the dish situation. Okay, good job. We continue, my dear teachers. What do we have here? Fine. We have another methodology we're using in our classrooms. This is about the task-based language teaching, all right? You already know what task is, right? So, what is this approach about, right? Let's see. In this approach, students use language, right? Students definitely use language, but they use language to complete tasks. That is why this approach is called task-based, because it focuses in different tasks. Tasks to use in order to use language, in order to use English, right? Okay, to complete meaningful tasks, all right? Meaningful tasks, that is very important to highlight, with authentic outcomes, right? Authentic results. Language, so language is a tool. Language is a tool for task completion, right? It is a tool, right? It is a tool to complete different tasks. Tasks that are meaningful, that are authentic, all right? In which they use language. What are the characteristics of this TBLT, task-based language teaching, right? What are the characteristics? One more time, look at here, right? Meaning. Meaning over form, remember, right? Focus on meaning. Meaning over form. Focus on how students use language effectively, and they are using language in order to communicate, right? To communicate ideas, right? And not to pay attention to accuracy, for example, right? Remember that. Meaning over form, right? This is also aligned to the CLT, right? Meaning over form, right? Communicate over perfection, right? Over perfection, accuracy, etc. Right? The important thing is to promote communication in our students, right? Encourage our students to use this language, right? To talk in English, right? Of course, authentic tasks, communicative outcomes, right? Communicative evidences, right? at the end of the session, they should communicate, right? Problem solving is also another characteristic, as well as in TLT, remember, and real life relevance, of course. Okay, what is the typical TBLT cycle? Well, remember that it's a task-based approach. So we have to pay attention to the sequence of different tasks in the sessions, right? We have a pre-task, for example. Then we have the task cycle. Remember that here is necessary to help our students to get this communicative outcome at the end of the session. So here is very important scaffolding, right? Remember that. It's very important that during the task cycle, right? Scaffolding. Because it is an approach that is based on the develop, right, of different tasks in order to get a communicative result, right, outcome. All right. Okay. And of course, the language focus, definitely, right? It should be aligned to the communicative approach. The language focus and reflection, all right? It's very important to develop this in our students. Okay, we continue, my dear teachers, with the next slide. So, if we make a comparison between this TBLT and traditional activities, we have that the tasks in this approach, they are meaningful for students. They are contextualized in a communicative scenario. They have communicative purpose, right? In traditional education, the activities were isolated, right? There wasn't real communicative purpose in the past, right? Outcome oriented. Yes, because the tasks that we are going to develop in this cycle, all the tasks, right? All the scaffolding process should be orientated to a communicative outcome at the end of the session, right? On the contrary, in traditional education, right, the activities were form oriented, right? In the past, teachers paid attention to accuracy, to grammatical correction, right? And nowadays, this is the least aspect we assess, right? Because we should promote communication, exchange of ideas, etc. Yes, of course, communication is key. And here, for example, the repetition, the memorizing process, right? There's a real purpose and here a mechanical production. All right, what is the common fund structures regarding this approach, right? For example, when you have activities, okay, grammar practice, okay, this guy's a task, right? But these tasks don't have a real communicative outcome, right? There's no communicative purpose. They're not meaningful, right? And also here what we have is more related to this, right? When we have grammar practice that are not connected to each other in order to use language, right, to communicate at the end, right? So attention to this, right? Grammar practice disguised as task, okay? So, dear teachers, if students only manipulate language mechanically, right, it's not TBLT, right? it is not. Because remember here the characteristics, right? For task-based language teaching, we should have different tasks, right, in the cycle, and they should be organized in a way they are used to communicate, right? To communicate in the evidence, the communicative outcome, remember, okay? Good. We have here a poem-like item, right? A poem-like item. So, my dear teachers, come on. I encourage you to read the context and let me know what your answer is here. All right? Okay, go ahead. Let's start reading this and let me know your answer. Come on, my dear teachers. All right. Okay. So I will start reading the context, okay? But on the chat box, please be active on the chat box. Type your answers, okay? So let's see. Let's start, my dear teachers. Well, one more time, right? It's very important to clarify that this is a poem-like item. Poem-like item, okay? This is not an authentic item in one of the poems, for example, right? Because sometimes real items in the exam, they are not specifically, okay, this question is about the task-based language teaching approach. No, what they do, what Minedo does is to provide, right, some items in which everything is connected and aligned. For example, in one item, you can have, for example, the competency-based approach, connecting with the communicative approach, or maybe the communicative approach connected with this task-based language teaching approach. Okay, so that's why. All right, but let's start reading this. Okay, again, the answers, please. Let me know the answers, your answers on the chat box. All right, let's start. A fifth grade English teacher. All right. Okay, here we have the purpose, right? Wants students to develop the competency. What competency? The first competency, right? Communicate orally in English as a foreign language. This is the first competency, right? So this teacher's purpose is to develop this competency in the students, right? All right. Okay, we have three answers on the chat box. Luis, Elizabeth, and Mercedes, they say that is letter C. Thank you, dear teachers. We continue reading. Okay, the rest, please. Let me know your answer. Okay. The learning purpose of the session, okay, here we have the learning purpose, okay. The learning purpose is that students use expressions for giving recommendations, right, and negotiating decisions, all right, about places to visit in their city. This is the learning purpose in the session, right? Okay, use expressions, right? For giving recommendations, and not only that, a language function. No, here we have language function, right? When they say giving recommendations, right? Giving recommendations, all right, or negotiating decisions, right? The topic is places to visit in the city, but these two, giving recommendations and negotiating decisions, these are language functions, all right? Remember, language functions. Mhm. Remember that in the past, in traditional education, teachers, teachers taught students contents, right? Contents, theory, grammatical rules, right? Nowadays, the approach is different, right? We should guide our students in order to make them to use the language through, for example, functions, right? Okay, so this is the learning purpose. The question here is, which of the following activities, we have activities, okay, best aligns, all right, with the task-based language teaching approach, all right, TBLT, right? Task-based language teaching approach. Okay. Okay, so which of the following activities best aligns with this? Okay, within the competency-based framework, right? Yes. Yes, as I said, everything is related, connected, and it is definitely connected with the competency-based approach or framework, right? Okay, one more time. The question is, which of the following activities best aligns to this? All right, with TBLT and the competency-based approach. All right, here we have three different activities. The first activity is that teacher presents expressions, okay? The teacher presents expressions for the language functions, right? For giving recommendations, yeah, the model should, for example, right? Or the question, why don't, etc. Right? Okay. Well, the teacher presents these expressions and then students practice. Students practice the expressions, right? They practice the expressions through substitution drills, right? Repetition, that here we have repetition, right? The drills, substitution drills. Are students autonomous in this activity? Think about it, right? Are students really developing their competence here? Are students using the language here? Because remember, this teacher wants the students to develop the first competency, right? Think about it, all right? Think about it. So after the students practice the expressions through substitution drills, they perform, it says they perform a short dialogue in pairs, right? Using the model provided. Okay, using the model provided. So the teacher provides a conversation, a dialogue, and students use this model. Maybe they modify or change some words, some parts, but they perform a dialogue similar to this, right? Based on the model. Okay, one more time. Think about if students are autonomous here or students generate their own language, formulating questions or answers, right? Expressions using the functions, right? Think about it. In the second activity, B says the students read. Okay, remember, think about that type of activity it is. Think about the purpose of the activity. If the purpose is aligned to this, right? You should remember that. Okay, students read short descriptions, right, of tourist attractions. All right. Okay, remember that the topic is places to visit in the city, right? So students read short descriptions of tourist attractions, and then they identify in these descriptions useful expressions for recommending places. Okay, well, yeah, maybe here they learned about some expressions for giving recommendation. That is the language, the first language function, right? But through a written activity, right? Well, a reading activity, because first they read, right? Okay. Afterwards, they answer comprehension questions. You see, it's a reading task. They answer comprehension questions, and then they prepare a short oral presentation. Okay, describing their favorite place. Okay, but one more time, remember the teacher's purpose. The teacher wants to develop the first competency, right? It is regarding to the speaking skill, right? If they read first, they answer questions, and they give an oral presentation, are students really improving their communicative skill here? Is there really interaction in one of the aspects or points in this activity? Think about it, please. All right. Well, here we have a reading task, right? Remember, here we have a reading task. Is it meaningful? Think about it. That type of task here is the drills, right? Remember that. Okay. The last activity says in groups, okay? Here we have something different. In groups, students receive a situation, all right, in which foreign exchange students will visit their city, okay? Some students will visit the city. Foreign exchange students that are not Peruvians, students from schools in different parts of the world, right? They come here for an academic exchange, and they are foreign exchange students, and they visit us here, right? They will visit their city, all right, for only one day, okay? Good, so this is the situation, right? Foreign exchange students will visit their city for only one day, all right? Using maps, schedules, prizes, and attraction cards, they must discuss options, discuss options, negotiate ideas. Remember the second language function, negotiating decisions, right? And then agree on the best itinerary according to the visitor's interest and budget, of course, right? Okay, here we have the second function, right? Finally, each group presents. Presents and justify its decision. Each group perform this communicative activity, right? It's like a role play. In other words, right? They acted out and finally they justify its decision. Okay. Good. The question here is, which of the following activity best aligns with a task-based language teaching approach within the competency-based framework, right? Here the question here, it is, which option requires students to complete, right? Okay. Here, which option, all right, requires students to complete a meaningful communicative task, right? Because this is task-based language teaching. My dear teachers, which option requires students to complete a meaningful communicative task? What about option A? Do students here complete a meaningful communicative task when they repeat? Is this meaningful? Is this communicative when they repeat? And then when they reproduce a very similar model, conversation-based dialogue, right? Based on the model, this is very controlled. It doesn't develop autonomy. It doesn't develop the competency, the first competency, right? Think about it. What about this one? Do students complete in B a meaningful communicative task when they read? When they read, is this aligned to the competency the teacher wants to develop in their students when they read and answer comprehension questions? Are these tasks communicative? Do these tasks promote a communicative outcome? The outcome here is the short oral presentation, but remember that to be communicative, we need interaction between peers, between students. Do you think that in an oral presentation, students interact each other? Think about it. What about this one? The group activity, right? The group activity in which they receive the situation, right? Okay. In which of the activities, right, is language used as a tool, right? You need to think about it. In which activity is language, English, right? Used as a tool, right? To solve, remember, to solve a real world problem or a scenario, right? Because remember that TBLT is also aligned to problem solve activities, right? Remember? So think about it. In which of the activities is the English used as a tool, right? In this approach, we use language, right, as a tool to complete tasks, but task with communicative purpose, right? No tasks that are isolated each other and with no communicative outcome, right? Remember, in which of these tasks, in which of these activities, English is used as a tool to solve a real world problem. Do students solve a real world problem here when they repeat the substitution drills and they reproduce a dialogue, changing some words or some parts? What about this one when they read, answer the question, and give an oral presentation? What about this situation here? Parents change students visit the city and they should decide, right, on the best itinerary according to the visitor's interest and budget. Think about it. My dear teachers, the activity best aligned with these approaches, as you said on the chat box, is definitely the third, letter C, right? The rest are distractors, right? Here the teacher presents the expressions, right? Yes, that part is okay, but then the substitution drills, the teacher here is not really developing this competency, right? And when they model a dialogue, right? No, right? It's not the best answer, right? Okay. What about the second distractor? The distractor in letter B, right? Here the students read descriptions, answer some questions, give a presentation, right? This activity focuses in reading a skill. This is not related to the communicative, to the first competency we have in the CENEP, right? That is communicates orally in English, right? Students don't produce language. Students read, okay? It is not related, right? Students don't solve a communicative problem in pairs or in groups collaboratively, right? They don't solve. They do the task isolated, alone. There's no interaction, okay? But here they interact. It is meaningful. It has authentic purpose, communicative outcome, right? Students analyze options, right? Compare ideas when they negotiate, right? And finally, they justify decisions, right? The final product, the communicative outcome, right, is related to this TBLT, right? it's not just to use the grammar or to use the language focus, the language function without any purpose. No, the purpose is communicative, right? They integrate the capacities here, right? They think by themselves, they are autonomous. Students make decisions here, right? Exactly. Good job. It's letter C, my dear teachers. All right? Good. One question, do students work in pairs or groups? Here, in letter C, students work in groups. In groups. Here it says. In the first, well, in letter A, the first instructor, they work in pairs. But there's no real communication here, Mercedes, because what the students do is to reproduce a model that the teacher provides, right? It's, for example, when you put on the board a conversation, right? And maybe you underline some words in the conversation. And then you say, okay, dear students, change a little bit the conversation, replacing the underlined words with other information. No, you change the names, you change some other words. But in that kind of activities, students are not really communicating each other. What they are doing is to reinforce, maybe. They're reinforcing, right? Okay, but this is not good for a communicative activity, because in a communicative outcome, students should generate language by themselves, all right? Here, students practice in pairs, but they are not really interacting each other. They're reproducing a model, right? Here, students work individually. There's no interaction here, right? But here, yes, they interact in groups. And in group, they make decisions, they negotiate, and finally they share their findings, they share what the best itinerary is, right? Okay, they justify their decisions. When they justify, they produce language by themselves, right? This is very high cognitive demand too, all right? They work collaborative here, right? They interact. They should interact each other. They should communicate each other in groups to find out what the best itinerary is, right? They should talk in English to come out with the best decision, right? Okay. They think by themselves. They work autonomously, right? They think by themselves. Here they reproducing. It's not okay, right? This is aligned, my dear teachers. This is aligned to both approaches, right? Yes, good. All right, my dear teachers, we continue. Next slide. Okay, we continue. I will continue with the next one. All right, here we have another approach. All right, this approach is the project-based learning. PBL, right? Project. Okay, project-based learning. Okay, now let's talk about projects, right? Projects, right? Before we talk about tasks, right? Now projects. All right, here it says, right? This is an approach where students develop learning, right? They develop learning, they learn things, students learn things through extended projects, right? Maybe the project you promote, maybe it lasts the whole unit, maybe 3 sessions in a row, right? Extended projects, all right? projects that are connected to authentic problems or questions, right? Remember the problem solving a focus, right? Okay, so what are the key elements in this type of activities, right? We need an authentic problem or question to be solved, right? The inquire, that means that students ask questions, ask for different things, and finally they make decisions, right? Based on this, that collaboration between peers, between students, right? There's a final product in a project, right? The product, the production, maybe a report, portfolio, etc., right? Magazine, something, right? Or a final performance, right? The investigation too, right? Okay, what are some typical products here? Campaigns, for example, presentations, documentaries, magazines, proposals, right? Okay. In most of the cases, my dear teachers, these products, right? These projects are based on the different approaches we have in the CNEP, right? For example, the human rights-based approach, right? Or the inclusive approach, right? The environmental approach, right? Remember that. Okay, my dear teachers, we continue. Mhm. Here it says, for example, no, can you see it? Let's see. Okay. All right. Here it says, for example, model for an accessible playground. Mhm. Accessible playground for everyone at school, no? Students, the students with necesidades educativas especiales, and for everyone, right? Remember that first session, right? Here, students' mental health awareness content. Mhm. Yes. These are the typical topics, right? Mental health, inclusion, right? Right. Running a mini cafe. Entrepreneurship too, also, right? This approach. Real world exposure. Yes. Okay, well, as I said, these products, right, are aligned to the different approaches in the CNEP. We also covered in the first session. Okay, so, well, we continue here. Okay. Okay, my dear teachers, what we have here is a comparison, right? Comparison between the project-based learning and simple projects, all right? What makes this project different in the PBL approach, right? First of all, the inquiry-driven, right? Students should ask, formulate questions, right? Students should, based on these answers, based on their research, based on the information they got, they after that they should solve the problem. So they should make decisions, right? In a simple craft project, right? Students focus on the product, right? But the previous steps are not important here, right? And remember, we are in a formative assessment process, right? We should give our students, right, the opportunity to improve each time, right? the journey they have in their learning process, it's more important even than the result, right? Because we should accompany our students in that process, strengthen their strong points or aspects, right? But also telling them in a very gentle and honest way their improvement areas. This is how they improve, right? But not here, for example, right? Problem solving. Yes, of course, they solve some problems, no, regarding the different approaches. And this is more like a decorative task, right? In the past, yeah, this was the priority, right? Now we should pay more attention to how students interact each other and communicate each other over that if the product is nice visually or not, right? Sustained investigation, and yeah, this is more isolated, right? What are the common pond distractors? Well, for example, confused, right? Created products alone are isolated that are not, okay, if they are creative, it doesn't mean that they are PBL products or, yes, evidences, right? The project-based learning, right? It doesn't mean that. Remember that the project is extended, right? And everything has to be conducted in a way, at the end, we have a communicative production or performance, right? So these are the key elements, as I said, these are the key elements in this approach, all right? Well, we continue, my dear teachers. Okay, here we have a pond like item, because as I said, sometimes in the exam, in the PUM, there's no specific questions about, okay, project-based learning, but in the different contexts, in the different situations, yes, you identify, you can identify, okay, this is project-based learning, right? Okay, my dear teachers, one more time, let's read the context and let me know your answer on the chat box, please. All right, come on. My dear teachers, let me know your answer. Okay, we will read the context, right? Well, I'm doing this, please. The moment you know the answer, let me know on the chat box, please. All right, about this approach. Project-based learning. Let's start. Okay, a fifth grade English teacher plans to develop, okay, the competency writes diverse types of text in English as a foreign language. Okay, this is our competency 3, right? Our third competency we have in the sentence, right? Okay, so let's see. This teacher plans to develop this competency, right? Competency is writes diverse types of text in English, okay? The writing skill is here, all right? So this is what the student, well, what the teacher wants, right? To do so, students will work, right, for 3 weeks, okay? The project lasts 3 weeks, okay, on a project called Promoting Responsible Tourism in Our Community, okay? Good. For 3 weeks, all right? Extended project. Students will analyze local tourist problems, the problem solve focus, right? They should analyze these problems, right? Interview community members. All right, here we have, for example, the element that is the inquire, right? Asking questions, interviewing members, uh, gathering data, right? To take the best, to make the best decisions, right? Here we have this element. Yeah, the inquired element here presented, right? Review digital sources, the investigation here, right? The research presented here, right? Review digital sources, okay, and collaboratively design an English brochure. Okay, this is the product because the competency is the third one, right? Okay, an English brochure for foreign visitors. Okay, here we have the product, right? They will produce this, the final product in this project, right? All right. It is aligned. It is aligned to the teacher's purpose for this project, 3-week project, right? Well, we continue. Okay, we have 2 answers on the chat box. Good. Elizabeth and Luis says that is B. Yeah, the inquiry element, Nancy, is when it says that the students interview community members, because in that way, students generate some questions, students will gather information, will gather data, and with this data, they will analyze and then finally will make the best decision, right? The best decision to be included in this brochure, right? And not only that information that they will get from the members, right? They will also review digital sources. Here we have, for example, the investigation element we mentioned, right? Remember the investigation. In this approach, that project-based learning, investigation is another key element. Investigation, research, right? Element or characteristic, right? Yes, you should highlight this. It's also very important. Okay. All right, my dear teachers, we continue. During a pedagogical support visit, the observer notices that the teacher, okay, like pedagogical support visit, like the monitoring, right? The observer, all right, notices that the teacher dedicates most classroom time to correcting, okay, to correcting grammatical accuracy, okay, before allowing students to continue working on the brochure, all right? So there's a lot of correction, grammatical correction during this support visit, right? Yes, the teacher explains, I prioritize grammatical precision. Okay, this is what the teacher said, right? Because the final product, the brochure, remember, the final product is the brochure, all right? Here it says the brochure. All right, the final product must not contain language errors. So yeah, definitely these teachers prioritize accuracy, right? Grammatical perfection, right? Okay. Which aspect, right? Which aspect of project-based learning, PBL, right? Which aspect of project-based learning is being least promoted in the situation, right? Is being least promoted, right? Which of these elements or characteristics of this PBL approach, right, is being least, all right, promoted, right, in the situation? What situation? The fact that the teacher focuses in grammatical precision, right? And the students are not really advancing the project to end in the final product, that is the brochure, right? In this situation, you should identify what the situation is to, right? What situation is the question referring? The situation described here with the observer, right? The situation described here with the observer during this pedagogical visit, right? Monitoring, all right? Well, let's read now. We have more answers, I think. Yes, Nancy says that is B. Good. All right. Letter A, okay? It says authenticity, all right? Authenticity is being least promoted, right? It says here. All right. Okay. Why? It explains. Because students are working on a real communicative issue, right? The problem is here, this one. Responsible tourism in the community, right? With a communicative purpose. All right, students are working on a real community issue. All right, yes, tourism, promote a responsible tourism. All right, community issue with a communicative purpose. All right, authenticity. Okay. Here in the project, they will first analyze the local tourism problems. They will interview the members in the community. They will research in different digital sources. And with all the data they gathered, they collected, right? Students will make decisions in order to work collaboratively, right? And Well, they will design this brochure for foreign visitors, right? In order to promote this responsible tourism, right? It says that the element that is least promoted is authenticity. Do you think so? Really? Okay. Because authenticity means that the project should give students the opportunity, right, to solve a real world problem, a problem that might happen in the real life, in the community, right? Students will generate language by themselves. Do you think that this is the element least promoted here? What about B? It says students agency. This is the aspect that is being least promoted. Why? It says here, because excessive teacher control. There's excessive teacher control, right? And this control, this teacher's control may limit decision making, right? What other elements too? The inquire too, right? That iterative construction of meaning. Yes, here we have the constructivism theory, right? Okay. Remember in the situation with the observer, right? With the situation, right? Okay, the student agency, the student autonomy because of the excessive teacher control, right? Students don't build meaning by themselves because the teacher gives the answer, the teacher gives everything, right? And they don't reflect on that, right? Okay. The collaborative learning. This is the third aspect. All right. Why? Why is in this alternative the collaborative learning less promoted? It says because students are producing a shared brochure. Okay, students are producing a shared brochure instead of individual assignments. Does it make sense? Does it make sense for you, my dear teachers? But when they design the brochure at the end, because this is the final product in the project, right? When they design this brochure, they will work collaboratively, right? They will work as a team. They will work as a team, right? They will produce this brochure with all the students' ideas, right? With the group decision, right? Okay. They are not working alone, isolated, right? All right. If they will work alone in individual assignments, this is not related to the project-based approach, right? Okay, one more time. The question, read the question carefully. Which aspect of the PBL is being least promoted in this situation, the situation with the observer, right? The Minedu observer, right? The situation. Okay. Authenticity, collaborative learning. What do the teachers say on the chat box? B. Okay, letter B. Yes, you are right, my dear teachers, right? The aspect, the element, the characteristic, the principle, right, that is affected, the most affected here in this situation with the observer when the teacher said, I prioritize grammar, right, over meaning, etc. Yes, it's definitely the student agency, the student control, right? The teacher controls the process, right? Students don't develop their own learning here when the teacher gives the answer, right? Students don't make decisions by themselves during the process of writing, right? The brochure, right? They don't build meaning, right? There are not reflective questions, right? Yes, this is affected. This is affected, all right? The students is not autonomous, right? Okay. I have a question for you. Think about this question, my dear teachers. Think about this question, please. Okay. What is more important, right? What is more important in PBL and in project-based learning? Okay. What is more important? Perfect grammatical, okay? Perfect grammatical accuracy or meaningful. Can you see it? Okay, let's see. All right, or meaningful, okay. Inquiry, right? And project development, because they should develop the project, right? They should develop the project to reach the final product. There's no other purpose, right? If they are developing a project in 3 weeks, the idea is that all the groups reach the final product, right? Project development. So, my dear teachers, can you see my question? Can you tell me what is more important in this approach? What is more important? Okay, can you see the question? No, you cannot see the question. Maybe here. Okay. What is more important here? Yes, you can see the question now. Let me know on the chat box. What is more important, my dear teachers? What of this is more important in this approach, please? Perfect grammatical accuracy or meaningful inquiry and project development? Well, meaningful projects, meaningful inquiry and project development. The students should reach the final product. So yes, my students, my dear teachers, the answer for this question is B. Definitely, this is the most affected. This is the least promoted in the situation with the observer, the student agency, right? Option A and option C, they are distractors, right? Students are actually working on a real community issue, the responsible tourism. They are actually working on this, right? With a communicative purpose, definitely, right? This is a distractor. This is not the problem, right? The project here proposed is authentic, right? It develops authentic communication. It is aligned to the communicative approach too and the competency approach, And of course, the project-based learning, since we have a project to develop in 3 weeks, right? Letter C is another distractor. Students are producing a shared brochure and they are working collaboratively for it, right? They are working together. They are designing a shared product, right? They are participating in group. They work as a team, right? Yes. So the answer is definitely B. Okay, my dear teachers. Good job. Good job. All right. I will change the slide, okay? I will erase all the notes here. I will change the slide. Okay, my dear teachers. To finish, we will work on the content-based learning, CBL, right? Content-based learning. Look at here. We work today in different. The student agency, dear Nancy, is when the student is able to think by him or herself and to build, to construct, right? This is related to the constructivism theory, right? The student builds his own learning, right? A student thinks by themselves. A student can answer some reflected question given by the teacher. So in that way, Nancy, the student is autonomous, all right? Because the student looks for the best way to get the language, to use the language in a real project, in this case, in the previous slide, right? When you are autonomous, when you solve your problems, when you are independent, right? Yes. In that way, that was affected. That was affected here. That was affected here. Because when the teacher at any moment, no, okay, no, this is bad. You have an error here. The spelling is bad. Correct it. The student is not really autonomous, right? So the student agency is being affected and is not promoted here, or is the least promoted. I think it's not promoted at all here with this situation with the observer, right? Yes, very good. All right. All right, my dear teachers. We will finish with the content-based. Well, in this content-based approach, right, CBL, yes, students revise content, they integrate, right? Students integrate language learning, right, with meaningful academic or thematic content, right? But the purpose is not to teach them contents or topics. No, the idea is to use them, all right, in order to make them learn how to use language with this, right? So students learn language through content, right? We should use this to develop, right, language in our students, right? The focus is to make them talk in English, to make our students communicate in this language, right? That's the purpose. So what are some characteristics of this approach, content-based approach, CBL? The interdisciplinary learning, right? because they can learn about different science, for example, or different topics regarding culture, history, etc. Right? Meaningful topics, yes, meaningful, contextualized topics for them, relevant for them, topics that students are interested in, right? Exactly, contextualized language use, right? Contextualized language use refers to the communicative situation, the communicative purpose, right? We should provide our students opportunities to use language in a real life situation, right? And yes, the cognitive engagement, right? Okay, so they examples, right, of this content. Students learn English through different issues like environmental issue, and this is also aligned to the environmental approach or different interest topics, right? The next slide. What are the common distractors about this content-based approach? For example, to think that teaching vocabulary, right? All right, it's a topic, right? For example, teaching vocabulary lists about a topic is not really content-based learning, right? Remember, what we should do is to use contents, right? Or different academic topics to use these, right, in order to teach language, right? In order to make our students, all right, in order to make our students to use language, to use English in a meaningful, all right, communicative, authentic, remember the characteristic communicative, all right, situation, all right? Okay, what about the next slide, all right? Look at here, my dear teachers. What we have is another like item because in the exam in September, right? The next exam you will take in September, you are not gonna find questions in which you have, oh, okay, this is the content-based approach. No, you will find different scenarios or contexts in which everything is related. Everything is related, okay? All the approaches in SENEB, etc. But okay, I present here a poem-like item. Please read the context, read the question carefully, and then let me know your answer on the chat box, please. All right? Come on, my dear teachers. We will finish with this question, and tomorrow, Sunday, we will continue with the other contents that we need to revise. Okay? Good. All right. Let me know your answer, please. All right. Good. Okay, my dear teachers, we will start, but when you know the answer, type it on the chat box, please. All right, so let's start. It says a secondary English teacher. You're right, like us, right? A secondary English teacher is planning a unit, right? Okay, is planning a unit about water pollution. All right, in the local community. Okay, this is aligned to the environmental approach and the human rights-based approach too, right? Okay, so this teacher is planning a unit about this topic, right? Water pollution in the local community. Okay, the teacher wants, right? The teacher wants students to develop oral interaction skills. Okay, this is competency one, the first competency we have in the CNEP, right? This is about the speaking skills, right? The oral production, right? This is what the teacher wants. This is the teacher's purpose, to develop oral interaction skills while also understanding the environmental impact of human activities, right? So the context of this oral interaction is this, right? Okay. So this is what the teacher wants, right? To develop this skill in their students and also to make them understand this impact, right? The environmental impact of human activities, right? Okay. The question here is, which of the following activities, okay, actions, all right, best aligns with the content-based approach, with the content-based learning, right? Okay. Within the competency-based framework. Yes, everything is related, right? Okay, so which of these activities best aligns with these two, right? So the teacher says here, I have two answers. I have three answers. Luis says B as well as Mercedes and Honor. Okay, let's read the options, my dear teachers, okay? Let's read the options. Option A, students read, okay? Students read a list of environmental vocabulary words, okay? And with the list, they complete, right? With these keywords, they complete substitution drills using the structure. Here we have the repetition, right? Remember, here we have the repetition. They are not building meaning here. They just reproducing something. What is the structure they will complete with this vocabulary words? There is pollution because, and the vocabulary here, right? And this is the structure. Okay. And afterward, they repeat model sentences orally, right? Okay. Are they, think about it, right? Think about it, please. Are they are students using content here? The content is the vocabulary, right? Are they using content here to use language in a communicative way when they reproduce, when they repeat these substitution drills, and then when they repeat a model or model sentences orally? Think about it, okay? Think about it. Are they really developing competences here, right? Think about it. The next B, students watch a short documentary, okay, about river contamination, okay. Here it says pollution, right? But remember the context in the unit. It is about water pollution in the local community, okay? So you should pay attention to this. And here it says river contamination. Is it aligned to the context, to the situation, right? In the region, right? Okay. They watch a documentary. They identify the main causes, right? And yes, the consequences too. They discuss possible community solutions in groups. There's a discussion here, right? There's a discussion. In a discussion, students interact each other, right? Okay, the type of activity here, right? Okay, and then they create, says here, they create a public awareness campaign in English for their school, right? All right, good. All right. And what about letter C? Here, students analyze the grammar rules, right? They analyze the grammar rules of cause and effect connectors, okay? They complete gut feel exercises in which they should complete probably with these connectors, the blanks in the blanks, right? Individually, it's very important to highlight this. How are they going to use this? Are they going to do this in pairs, individually? How, right? Individually. And finally, write 5 isolated sentences about pollution, very general, okay, using the target structures. Okay, remember, what is the teacher's purpose? He wants to develop oral interaction, right? Oral interaction based on this topic, and also to make them think about the impact of human activities, right? Which of the activities, actions here best aligns with content-based learning? Use content to use language in a communicative way, right? And also the competency-based framework. Which of these 3 activities best aligns? Okay? When the students read and then they repeat or reproduce, are they really using language? Is it a good opportunity to use this content? The content here is the vocabulary words, right? Is this a good opportunity with these activities, right? The substitution drills and then the model sentences. Are these good activities? Is this a good opportunity to students to use this content, right? To use this content in order to produce language, right? Think about it. What about the next one? Are students using the content here, right? Causes and consequences, right? Okay. Are they using this content in order to use language, generate questions, right? Interact each other in a real communicative activity when they discuss, for example, right? Because when they discuss, they should ask some questions, exchange ideas, opinions, and then find out, right? Then find out the best, and make the best decisions, right? In group, collaboratively, right? And what about here when they analyze grammar rules and they then complete some exercises and write? Is this really a communicative activity in which they use the content? The content is the connectors, right? Remember, oral interaction skills. Do you promote oral interaction skills when you write sentences or analyze grammar rules? Think about it. What is your answer? You said letter B. All right. Again, the question is which of the activities best aligns, right? My dear teachers, letter A is the distractor, right? The content here, that is the vocabulary list, right? Doesn't promote real communication, use of language in a communicative way, because they don't produce language. Here they repeat, they reproduce something from a model, right? It's a very controlled practice, and the focus is not to develop these interaction skills, right? Maybe this is about pollution. The topic, right, it's quite similar, but it's more like a grammar practice, right? More like a grammar practice. They are not using the language. What about C? Letter C is another distractor, right? There is grammar analysis here, and they complete the task. They produce isolated sentences, right? But students are not producing authentic communication. They are not work in a collaborative way. They are not interact. They don't interact with between them, right? Okay. My dear teachers, the answer is, as you mentioned, letter B. Exactly. This activity best aligns with the content-based learning, the discussion. Discussion is another speaking communicative activity, right? Good. All right, my dear teachers. One more time, you did a great job today. Tomorrow we will continue with the other approaches, right? We stopped here in this approach. Tomorrow we will continue with the PPP model, presentation, practice, production, and the last one. All right, and more practice, of course. All right, my dear teachers, thank you for your participation today. You are amazing participants. See us tomorrow, okay, at the same time. Okay, my dear teachers, have a nice Saturday, sorry. Have a nice Saturday and see you tomorrow. Bye-bye, everyone. See you tomorrow. All right, thank you, Mercedes. Yes, goodbye. See you tomorrow. Have a nice afternoon. Bye-bye.